All right, ready to dive deep into the world of bread. You guys sent us so much research on this. What articles, personal stories, recipes, you really want to know it all.
It's a fascinating topic and definitely something that touches every culture around the world.
Well, today's deep dive is going to be all about bread. And we've got a lot to cover, so let's get started.
Yeah.
Let's go all the way back to the very beginning.
Okay.
Like 14,400 years ago, the earliest evidence of bread baking. This Wikipedia article on flatbread mentions that it predates agriculture.
Really?
Yeah. Can you imagine baking bread before agriculture?
Wow. It's amazing to think about.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, that means those early humans were figuring out how to use wild grains to make, well, this earliest form of bread, which was a flatbread, right?
That's fascinating. It really changes our perception of what those early societies were capable of.
And they didn't stop there. A few thousand years later, around 6000 BC, the Egyptians discovered sourdough. Imagine being the first person to figure out fermentation.
It's almost like a magical process, right?
Yeah, totally. And it wasn't just about the taste. This article on the history of bread says that sourdough helped to preserve bread for longer, which was obviously really important before refrigeration and things like that.
It makes sense.
Okay, so we know bread has been around for a while, but here's where it gets really interesting. Bread and power. According to this YouTube video on the history of bread, as civilizations grew, bread went from being just food to a symbol of power. It was even a form of social control.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the Roman Empire. They used grain, particularly wheat, as a basis for taxation.
Wow.
I mean, imagine paying your taxes with a sack of wheat.
That's wild.
It shows you just how essential bread was to their society and how controlling it allowed rulers to have power.
And it wasn't just about economics either. There's a section in our research that mentions that Roman emperors would give free bread to the people to maintain power.
Right.
Like the whole bread and circuses idea. You keep people fed and entertained, and they're less likely to, cause any problems.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a strategy that's been used throughout history. Bread, as a staple food, really did play a crucial role in shaping societies and maintaining order. It was about power dynamics and resource management.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got this fascinating history, but what about the science?
Yeah.
How is bread actually made?
It's actually pretty simple, right?
Right.
Flour, yeast, salt, water. That's all it takes.
That's right.
But the magic really lies in how those simple ingredients interact.
Exactly. Like yeast, for example. It's a single-celled fungus that basically eats the sugar in the dough and releases carbon dioxide, creating those air pockets that give bread its texture.
So that's what makes it fluffy.
Exactly.
Okay. What about gluten? This article on the science of bread talks about how important gluten is. It's this protein network that gives bread its chewiness. It helps it trap those gas bubbles that are created by the yeast.
Right. And then, of course, you have to bake it, and the heat transforms the dough. The starches, they gelatinize, the proteins coagulate, and get that beautiful golden brown loaf of bread that, we all know and love.
Yeah.
All right. So we've explored the history, the power dynamics, the science. Now, are you ready for the main event?
Oh, yeah. Let's get to it.
Let's talk types of bread.
All right.
Because I know you listening at home are ready to hear about all the different breads from around the world.
It's a big world. Where do we even begin? We have flatbreads like pita and lavash. We have sourdough with that tangy flavor. We've got rye bread. It's hearty and textured. And then there's enriched breads like brioche and challah with their additions of eggs and butter.
It's a lot. And this Wikipedia article on bread types barely scratches the surface. So to keep things simple, let's go back to the beginning with flatbreads. The original bread, right?
Yeah, flatbreads are found in so many cultures around the world, each with its own history and traditions. Really shows you how simple and adaptable bread is as a food. Welcome back. We're in the middle of our bread journey, and we were just talking about flatbreads, the oldest and most widespread type of bread. I think it's time we dig a little deeper, really explore this category.
Oh, for sure. I'm already thinking about lavash. Those thin sheets of bread, so versatile. You can use them for wraps, pizzas, even desserts. It's amazing.
It's true. This Wikipedia article about flatbread says that lavash actually comes from the Caucasus region.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's a real testament to how adaptable bread is.
Totally. And speaking of adaptable, what about pita bread?
Oh, yeah, with that pocket. Perfect for stuffing.
It's like a blank canvas for culinary creativity.
Yeah.
But I'm also curious about flatbreads that are a bit more, substantial, like naan. That Indian bread, a little charred on the outside, soft and chewy on the inside.
Ah, naan, that's a classic. Traditionally baked in a tandoor oven, which gives it that amazing texture and slightly smoky flavor, perfect with curries and other, rich dishes.
Definitely. Okay, so we've got lavash, pita, wow. There are so many different flatbreads out there. But let's move on to another category of bread that I know you're curious about. Breads that are leavened, but not with yeast. So we're talking about quick breads now.
Right, quick breads. They rely on chemical leaveners like baking powder or baking soda, so you don't have to wait for the yeast to do its thing. They're really quick to make.
So no kneading, no waiting. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
But what kind of breads are we talking about? Is it just your basic supermarket white bread?
No, not at all. Think about biscuits, those fluffy, buttery biscuits you get in the South.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect for breakfast or as a side dish. Or stones, crumbly and often a little sweet, perfect for tea time. And let's not forget pancakes. Technically, they're considered quick breads too.
Wow. Biscuits, scones, pancakes. I'm starting to see a theme here. It's all about comfort food, those breads that just make you feel good. I'm curious, though, are eggs and milk a must-have for these quick breads?
Not necessarily. Lots of quick breads do use eggs and milk. It adds to the flavor and the texture. But the key to making them quick is that chemical leavener. You can actually find lots of vegan or dairy-free quick breads out there that just use baking powder or baking soda to rise.
Wow, it's incredible how adaptable these quick breads are. All right, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about some breads that are, well, let's say a bit more indulgent. I'm thinking about enriched breads like brioche and challah. They're just so rich and flavorful. It's like they're in a whole different category.
You're right. Enriched breads often have things like eggs, milk, butter, sugar added to them. It gives them a richer flavor and often makes them softer too. Brioche with all that butter is a classic example. You can use it for French toast, pastries, everything.
And then there's challah, that beautiful braided bread often eaten during Jewish holidays and celebrations. It's so visually stunning and has such a unique, slightly sweet flavor.
It's a great example of how bread can be, more than just food. It can represent tradition and culture.
Totally. And speaking of breads with a special place in cultural traditions, we have to talk about sourdough. It's been around for thousands of years, and it feels like it's having a real moment these days.
Sourdough is so interesting because it uses wild yeasts and bacteria to ferment, which creates that tangy flavor that everyone loves. It's a slower process than using regular yeast, but the results are just so unique.
And it's not just the taste. Some people say sourdough is easier to digest because of that longer fermentation process. Is there any science behind that, or is it just, anecdotal?
Well, that's a good question, and the research is still going on, but there are some studies that suggest that the longer fermentation process can break down certain compounds that some people find difficult to digest.
Interesting. So we can't say for sure that it's a miracle food, but it's definitely a bread with a rich history and some potential health benefits. We can't forget about rye bread. It has that hearty flavor, the dense texture. You don't see it on as many menus these days, but it's definitely a classic.
Right. Rye bread has been a staple in Northern Europe and Eastern Europe for centuries. It has a lower gluten content, which is why it's a bit denser. And the flavor, it's often described as nutty or earthy.
It's like the bread equivalent of a warm hug. Okay, let's venture out of Europe for a second and talk about some breads from other parts of the world. Have you ever tried milk bread?
Yeah.
It's super popular in Asia, and it's supposed to be incredible.
Oh, yeah. Milk bread is known for being super soft and pillowy and a little bit sweet. People use it for sandwiches, toast, even desserts. It's another example of how diverse and creative bread cultures are around the world.
Man, I'm getting hungry just thinking about all this bread. It's amazing how many different types of bread exist, each with their own history, cultural meaning, and, of course, flavor.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still baguettes and ciabatta and focaccia and roti. So many more to explore.
The world of bread is never ending. But before we go too far, I want to talk about, those breads that aren't really breads. Like, what about bagels and English muffins? They're kind of in a category of their own.
Yeah, you're right. They do have some unique characteristics. Bagels, they get boiled before baking, which gives them that chewy texture and shiny crust. And English muffins, all those nooks and crannies, perfect for soaking up butter or jam.
Yeah. They're like the rebels of the bread world, defying all the rules. But, it's those unique qualities that make them so popular. So where do we go from here? We've covered so much, from flatbreads to enriched breads to sourdough and beyond, but I feel like there's still more to explore.
You're right, there is. The world of bread is constantly evolving. So in our final part, we're going to dive into some of the more modern trends in bread making and some of the challenges that the industry is facing today.
We're back. And as we've been talking about all these amazing breads from around the world, I keep thinking, what would those early bakers think about the bread we find in supermarkets today? I mean, would they even recognize it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, on one hand, we have access to so much variety. But on the other hand, there's definitely been a shift towards mass production and efficiency, sometimes at the cost of, flavor and quality.
For sure. Like we talked about earlier with that Chorleywood bread process, it was a game changer, but it also led to all these additives and shortcuts in bread making.
Right. You look at some of those ingredient lists, it's like reading a novel.
I know, right? And I think a lot of people are starting to really question the ingredients and the methods that are used in modern bread making. And they're looking for something, I don't know, more authentic.
Absolutely. People want real bread made with real ingredients.
So it's kind of like a bread rebellion.
Yeah, kind of. And you can see it in a few different ways. There's this huge resurgence in artisanal bread making. People are rediscovering sourdough and other slow fermented breads.
And it's not just home baking, right? There are all these small bakeries popping up everywhere, focused on quality and tradition.
Yeah, it's like a return to the roots of bread making.
Exactly. And I think it goes beyond just taste. It's about connecting with the history, understanding the science, and making conscious choices about what we eat.
Absolutely.
But let's be honest, not everyone has the time or the skill to bake their own bread. So is there a middle ground? Can we still have good bread without becoming master bakers?
Oh, for sure. I mean, there are a lot of larger bakeries that are starting to use more traditional methods and pay more attention to their ingredients.
So we can, vote with our wallets, support the businesses that are doing things right.
Exactly.
But I also think there's something special about making your own bread. It's almost therapeutic, wouldn't you say?
Totally. I mean, taking those basic ingredients, flour, water, yeast, salt, and turning them into something so delicious, it's a pretty amazing feeling.
It's like a little miracle happening in your kitchen. And whether we're baking at home or seeking out those artisanal loaves, I think our deep dive today has really shown how powerful bread is. It's more than just food. It's culture, it's community, it's sustenance.
Well said. Bread has been a part of human history since the very beginning. It's nourished us, brought us together, and even, inspired revolutions.
Yeah. And as we look to the future, I think it's clear that bread will continue to play a huge role in our lives, both as a source of nourishment and a symbol of our shared humanity. So, dear listener, next time you enjoy a slice of bread, take a moment to really appreciate it. Think about its journey from those ancient grains to your table. And if you're feeling adventurous, maybe try baking your own. You might just discover a hidden talent. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of bread. Until next time, happy baking.